Good morning, everyone. You're so well trained. Welcome back for our next episode in the Sacred Trust presentations. The National Park Service and the Gettysburg Foundation are delighted to bring back this very popular series, and we're delighted to have such a nice audience here for what I'm sure is going to be an outstanding presentation. The Sacred Trust tries very hard to bring together the best of the academic historical world, the public history world, the park rangers, all of us who, no matter where our historical interests start, they all end up here at Gettysburg somehow. And today we have one of those fascinating presentations from a person who probably didn't plan to do any of this when he first started out. He's shaking his head yes. A lot of you are fans of the first work that we see up here, Too Much for Human Endurance. This George Spangler Farm is a property of the Gettysburg Foundation. And for some of us who have been involved with the farm for a long, long time, this has become a very special place for us. It's not quite as special as some of our special guests today who are Spanglers by family affiliation, and we are delighted to have you all here with us today. But what we're going to hear today is part two. Now, I gave this introduction last week at the Gettysburg Foundation board meeting, but all of us who write books always kind of hope that it's going to be so popular that they'll want more. Tragically, they usually don't. But in this case, not only did we want more, but there was more to be said. And Ron stepped up. And he's produced a second book that has literally just come out. And you can see it here, Tell Mother Not to Worry. How many of you have been to the George Spangler Farm? You folks don't count. We know you've been there. Yeah. Good. A lot of you. For those of you who have not visited, make it a high priority to go out and visit the George Spangler Farm. The story is a fascinating one. It was a quiet farm on July 1st, 1863, when a few Union Army medical officers came down the driveway, the entryway, and they looked at the farm and they probably got very big smiles on their faces because everything that they had been trained to look for, a large barn, water sources, access, protection against enemy fire, at least on July 1st, all seemed to be in place. The decision was made, not by any of the Spanglers, by the way, that this was going to become the hospital for the Union Army's 11th Corps. Over the course of the next 5 weeks, until the 5th of August, the George Spangler Farm would become the haven of as many as 1,900 wounded Union and Confederate soldiers. It was one of the larger field hospitals and the one that was most forward located of all the Union Corps hospitals here on the battlefield. The Gettysburg Foundation has restored it. You can go out and really get a sense of what the activity was like on that field, especially during summer weekends when living history folks take over the property and just tell the story in amazing ways. Ron Kirkwood, our author, our speaker today, comes to us from the world of journalism. He wrote for a number of newspapers and other publications, and then it got to the point that we all hit sooner or later in retirement. What are we going to do when we grow up? What's that next project? What's that next story that we have to tell? Well, he walked into the visitor center, and he was talking to our director of volunteers, Ray Matlock, and I bet a lot of you know that. And Ray has a way of just drawing you in and finding out what your interest is and then taking full advantage of it. Well, Spangler Farm. And all of a sudden, his eyebrows kind of went up. And all of a sudden, he didn't know it right then, but he had found his muse. He had found that project. And he gave us our first story, and then it goes on to the second story. And we are just delighted that he can be here. You will be one of the first audiences to hear the story of, Tell Mother Not to Worry. I read almost anything that comes out on Gettysburg. There are not too many books that make me stop and go, wow. Most recently, it's Ron's books that have made me do that. If you don't need any more a credibility check than that, take that one and run with it. This is these are those new stories, that new history, those new pieces that we are still discovering 161 years later. With that, Ron.
Thank you, Carol. Can you hear me out there? Okay, good. I will always be grateful to Carol, going back to the first book, because she supported me. I mean, she was somebody that was a little scary. She's so smart and intimidating, but she's always been kind and gracious to me, and she even wrote advance praise for the second book. So thank you, Carol. And also, Wayne Motts. Wayne was light years ahead of me on the George Spangler Farm. I didn't find out about it until 2013. Wayne knew about the George Spangler Farm when he was in college, and he even visited it when he was in college. Then in 2008, when the Gettysburg Foundation purchased the farm, Wayne was in charge of the Adams County Historical Society. Is that correct? He and Kathleen George Harrison of the Park Service and Dan Welch of the foundation did amazingly important critical research on this farm as the foundation was buying it. And so when I decided in 2016, I'm going to research and write a book on this farm, all of their research was waiting for me. And so their research probably cut a year of time off my book work, and I got it done in 3 years, thanks to them. So I will always be grateful to Wayne, Kathleen, and Dan Welch. So thank you very much, Wayne, for all you did. The books. Book 1 was published in 2019, focused on the medicine at the two hospitals, the heroic surgeons, the heroic nurses, what the Spanglers went through when their farm was occupied as a hospital. During and after the battle, the casualties and the suffering, I also established why I believe George Spangler owned the most important farm to the Army of the Potomac's victory at Gettysburg. Book 2, Tell Mother Not to Worry, came out just last month and is a continuation of the first book. Very little is repeated. It's a sequel.
Ron, you've got to turn the switch on your microphone. Sorry. Got it on?
Is that better? Yeah, that's a ton.
Sorry.
Thank you, Wayne. I'm grateful to Wayne again. I also discussed the military importance of the farm in Book 2, especially with the Army of the Potomac Artillery Reserve and the critical role played in the battle by Powers Hill, which has been undercovered. Spanglers own most of Powers Hill, but as the title indicates, Book 2 features many soldier stories. What happened to these men at Spangler? What happened to those who survived the battle only to live the rest of their lives in pain because of their wounds? And what happened to the mothers and families of men who depended on a soldier for support who died at Spangler? So, let's talk about the George Spangler Farm. You can see how big it is in this red circle right here in 1863. It's 166 acres. It's huge. It dominates the countryside behind the line. Plus its location. Look how close it is to the left flank in Little Round Top. That's going to mean something. Close to the center of the line, close to the right of the line. And as a side note, this is about where we are right here now in the visitor center. So if you were to walk out of this building, walk down the sidewalk, walk past the parking areas, carefully looking both ways, cross the street, and then go into the woodsy area there, you're just about on the northern border of the George Spangler Farm. That's how close it was. In addition, George's dad, Abraham, owned all this land up here. That's visitor center land. That's foundation land up there. So we're probably on the Abraham Spangler Farm right now, either that or Catherine Gwynn. So while that battle was being going on, George and his dad, Abraham, owned land from here all the way up to Evergreen Cemetery. This is all Spangler land. They just filled up that fish hook. Okay, then there are the roads. Granite Schoolhouse Lane cut through the middle of Spangler Farm as indicated by the blue arrow. Blacksmith Shop Road is marked by the blue X's cutting through the farm. Both go directly to the line. Both connect the Tawnytown Road and the Baltimore Pike, the two main arteries. With the Spangler Farm, Union commanders had the size, location, and roads needed to hold massive amounts of infantry and artillery close by in reserve and get those reserves to the line quickly. This was a farm that could help win a battle. This map shows how the Army of the Potomac used George Spangler's farm. I'll bet you everybody in this room, most followers of Gettysburg, know very well the story of Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain and the 20th Maine and how the 5th Corps regiments got to Little Round Top so quickly. But what you might not know is the 5th Corps spent all of July 2nd, morning and afternoon, right here, on and off the George Spangler Farm. They're right behind the Round Tops. They got there so quickly because they were so close. So late in the afternoon on the 2nd, 5th Corps is ordered to get to the line. So part of them head down Granite Schoolhouse Lane. The rest of them heads down Blacksmith Shop Road. They're not gone long. Then the 6th Corps moves in right here, the same exact location. They're not there long before they run down Granite Schoolhouse Lane to the line. Then right after they leave later that night, a division of the 12th Corps leads up here. Where do they go? Granite Schoolhouse Lane. George Meade had his main street at Gettysburg, and it was a rutted little farm path that someday would be called Granite Schoolhouse Lane. Okay, the rest of the farm. I'm going to be talking about the 11th Corps Hospital today. They're right here. Their ambulances are in George Spangler's wheat fields here, and they're also at East Cemetery Hill. I'm going to be talking about the Artillery Reserve today and their ammunition train here. This 100 wagons, hundreds of mules, hundreds of men. They're supplying all of the reserve ammunition to all of the Army of the Potomac artillery. Granite Schoolhouse had a hospital, the second one on the farm. I'm going to talk about that. Powers Hill. George Spangler owned most of Powers Hill. Slocum had his right-wing headquarters up there. There's a signal station up there with the flags waving and the messengers running back and forth. Artillery and infantry up there. Meade returns to Powers Hill when he's bombed out of the Leicester House and watches the rest of the battle from Powers Hill. And then he returns on the 4th and makes his headquarters right here on George Spangler land. This photo shows one artillery battery. That's how many men, horses, and wagons required to operate 6 cannons and make up one battery. So that's one. Now imagine that the Spanglers at 2 p.m. on July 2nd had 19 of these batteries on their farm, and how much land that those batteries would have taken up. Each of the 7 Union Infantry Corps at Gettysburg had their own artillery batteries, totaling about 200 cannon among the 7 corps. These cannons, 2,300 men, 2,300 horses, another whole third of power. Plus the artillery reserve cannons based at Spangler didn't have to go where an infantry corps went. They were crucial utility players. They could be plugged anywhere in the line that they were needed and be counted on to perform well, and that's exactly what Artillery Chief Henry Hunt did on July 2nd and 3rd, often with only moments to spare to prevent a Confederate breakthrough. So, artillery reserve batteries left Spangler. They fought up here in the Wheatfield area, all along Wheatfield Road, all along the Trossel Farm, Plum Run Line, Cadore, all along Cemetery Ridge. They fought on Cemetery Hill, East Cemetery Hill, and the Artillery Reserve even fought on the Spangler's Powers Hill. Other farms saw a lot more combat than the George Spangler Farm at Gettysburg, and many farms were literally destroyed by it. But no single farm played a greater strategic and logistical role with its 2 roads, with Powers Hill and its in the middle of it all location in the George Spangler Farm in setting up the Union victory in the biggest battle of the Civil War. Okay, 2 hospitals. 1st Division 2nd Corps Hospital would have been in these fields here and probably in the trees too. You see Granite Schoolhouse there. Powers Hill basically comes down to the base here, and when it's wet, there's a stream through there. That 1 division, 1st Division 2nd Corps, 11th Corps Hospital, 3 divisions here. And then again, the modern day Granite Schoolhouse Lane there. Little was revealed about this hospital for generations, and it was only in operation for 2 days. But this was a major hospital. This hospital hosted the 1st Division 2nd Corps wounded and dying men who fought at Rosewoods, Stony Hill, and the Wheatfield. These were the fighters of the famous Irish Brigade. This was the division of Father William Corby, who granted the men general absolution moments before the Day 2 battle, thus clearing their path to heaven. This was the corps of General Hancock. More than 1,000 men in the 1st Division were casualties on just that one day of fighting, and by the end of the day on July 2nd, most of those wounded were either at the 1st Division 2nd Corps Hospital at Granite Schoolhouse on the George Spangler Farm, or they were waiting to be taken there. Top right photo, Chaplain John Henry Wilbrand Stuckenberg of the 145th Pennsylvania from the Erie area. He said, "Our hospital was at the foot of Powers Hill. I found the doctors and nurses busily engaged with the wounded, scattered around in all directions, some lying on blankets, some on straw, a few on stretchers, others on the bare ground. It was very evident that our regiment had again suffered severely." The hospital's proximity to the Union line offered great benefit in rushing wounded there, but it came under Confederate artillery overshots prior to Pickett's charge on July 3rd. So after only 24 hours, this hospital had to be moved farther behind the line. And describing that scene, upper middle, is Private Robert L. Stewart, 140th Pennsylvania. In this emergency, those who had the use of their limbs at once laid hold of the poor fellows who were helpless, pulling and dragging them as best they could to places of comparative safety. For a few moments, the confusion and distress which prevailed was terrible beyond expression. Those who could not move were crying out for help, and many who were partially disabled were attempting to drag their maimed or helpless limbs as far as possible from the immediate danger, one of the plunging shot and shells. Colonel Edward E. Cross, 5th New Hampshire, died in this hospital. Brigadier General Samuel K. Zook was treated here for a massive chest wound before dying in a house farther behind the line on July 3rd. His wound opened a hole so big that a doctor could see the general's heart beating. Major General Hancock was taken to what was left of the Granite Schoolhouse Hospital after his wounding during Pickett's charge and the end of the fighting on July 3rd before being transported further to the rear. That's what the site of one of the fields of the hospital looks like today. Open field in 1863. There are no signs, no markings. Now, any indication that something important happened here is just overgrowth and difficult to enter because it's so thick. So this important hospital in the Battle of Gettysburg is hidden today. I have actually talked to the Park Service about this and asked them about this. And they said that with all that they're handling right now, and because this wasn't a part of the battle, that it's not going to be a priority, which is understandable. Now the 11th Corps Hospital. All the suffering and distress I saw there was awful. The poor fellows came around us. We handed out cakes and bandages, but it went such a little ways. It made me so sorry that I had so little. Gettysburg resident Sarah Montfort. 11th Corps medical staffers picked the Spangler's Farm for a hospital on July 1st because of its proximity to the evolving front line and access to water, crops and livestock for food, buildings for hospital purposes, good roads, and wood for operating tables, tents, fires, and caskets. So while the 1st Division 2nd Corps Hospital used a field on Spangler land, the 11th Corps Hospital used the Spangler's barn, summer kitchen, house, other outbuildings, and fields. George Spangler was 47 years old during the Battle of Gettysburg. His wife Elizabeth was 44. They had 4 children, all of whom were living at home. Harriet, 21, Sabina, 19, Daniel, 17, and Benaiah, 14. Those 6 Spanglers were ordered by 11th Corps doctors on July 1st to either leave the property and get out of their way because they needed it all, or stay hidden out of the way in an upstairs bedroom. So that's what the Spanglers decided to do, is to stay in that bedroom. And that's where they lived during the 5 weeks and 2 days that their farm was occupied by a hospital. They could leave the room, but in doing so, they had to step over wounded and dying men and blood and feces and other bodily fluids. Spanglers built a classic Pennsylvania bank barn in the early 1850s. You've seen these same type barns all over the battlefield. There was a style brought over by the Swiss and Germans in the 1700s and the 1800s with a 7-foot forebay in the front, so that allowed more room for storage on the top floor, and the bank in the back, so the farmer could drive his wagon right up to the top floor for easy loading and unloading. I don't know if you can see it in detail in the bottom right map, Adams County in yellow. That's the hotbed of these barns. You can see it extends into Franklin County, through Adams, York, Lancaster, all the way up into Allentown. This is where you see the most of these barns. I've seen them on I-81 down through Maryland and Virginia. I've seen them on the turnpike out by Pittsburgh. I think they're just a genius style, and I don't know why they're not used all over the country. But one surgeon estimated there were 500 wounded men crammed in this barn. A hospital worker said he thinks it was more like 400. Either way, they were shoulder to shoulder. All of this hospital was horrific. All of this barn was horrific. But it was the worst under the forebay, that overhang, where the amputations took place, and just inside that front wall in the stable. That's where many of the worst cases awaited their surgery amid cries of agony and smells of infection, body fluids, and human feces. Cries and screams could be heard 50 yards away in the Spangler's house. Hospital workers covered their heads with a pillow at night to try to drown out the sounds. Nurses read scripture and prayed with the men in an attempt to help send them on their way in their final moments. Outside in the Spangler fields, the Army didn't provide enough tents or bedding or food or clothes for the first several days because Meade and Hancock banned them to Maryland to keep the roads clear for fast troop movement. This multiplied the misery of the wounded and dying men at Spangler and other hospitals who were forced to lie in the mud in the open when the thunderstorms came. Spangler hospital worker William R. Kiefer, shown at left, 153rd Pennsylvania, said, "No words can portray the pitiable condition, the more distressing because of the insufficient means immediately at hand to relieve the large number of helpless men." Spangler hospital worker James R. Middlebrook Wright, 17th Connecticut, said, "It is enough to make one's heart bleed to witness the amputations. I feel it my duty to do all I can for them. I cannot see them suffer, shall stay as long as I can stand it. You know nothing of the horrors of war and cannot until you go and see it for yourself." This is where surgeries and amputations took place, under the forebay of the Spangler's barn. Doctors could have more light and fresh air there away from the smells and crowds inside the barn. Surgeons worked with their backs up against that wall. They could perform an amputation in 5 to 15 minutes, depending upon the limb, and then move immediately to the next one. No washing required of bloody or germ-infested hands or bloody equipment, because they didn't understand how proper sanitation could prevent infection and reduce the spread of disease. A Spangler surgeon approaching total exhaustion called the work too much for human endurance. Private William Sullerton, age 19, 75th Ohio, said, "At the doorway I saw a huge stack of amputated arms and legs, a stack as high as my head. The most horrible thing I ever saw in my life. I wish I had never seen it. I sickened." Amputated limbs were loaded into a wagon and buried somewhere in a distant location on the farm. We don't know where they buried them. The amputations and surgeries and wounds attracted an infestation of flies that relentlessly harassed everyone. Then there were the maggots that covered the wounds and the stumps. Infections were expected after a Civil War surgery, and the worst infections could be smelled 8 to 10 feet away. So imagine the stench in an 8-man tent when they all had infections, when a hospital worker, nurse, chaplain walked in. So to help try to battle that, they cut down pine branches and used them in the tents as bedding and hanging them up, kind of a natural air freshener. First Sergeant Francis Strickland, 154th New York, woke up when the chloroform wore off while his arm was being amputated, July 3rd, at a school outside of a hospital in downtown Gettysburg. Medical supplies were so short at that point, July 3rd, during the battle, that the surgeons decided to finish his amputation even though he would be awake. One surgeon said, "He's a grizzly dog. I guess he will stand it." And Strickland did stand it. He said sawing the bone was the easiest part, did not hurt near as much as tying the arteries and sewing the skin. Strickland was taken to the 11th Corps Hospital at Spangler on July 4th, placed in a tent with 7 other comrades from the 154th New York. Of the 8 men in that tent, 5 died at Spangler. The 3 survivors included Strickland. Those 8 men in that tent provide one of the reasons that book 2 is so important to me, because I had their information for book 1, but I didn't have space. So I put the story of those 8 guys into 2 paragraphs. In book 2, I put them into 3 chapters, 3 chapters devoted to these 8 men. Many soldiers didn't tell the whole story of the seriousness of their wounds because they didn't want their families to worry back home. And almost always it was their mother or their wife that they were thinking about. Sergeant Henry Seas of the 82nd Ohio wrote to his brother from Spangler, "My leg was amputated just above the knee. I stood the operation very well, being under the influence of chloroform. I am very well cared for and in a fair way to get along well. I hope mother will not worry herself about me." But he died a week after he wrote that letter home. And then on the right on the screen, Private Daniel H. Purdy, age 21, 17th Connecticut. He had someone write home for him from Spangler saying, "Tell mother not to worry and take good care of the children." And then Private Purdy died a couple days later. Confederate Brigadier General Louis Armistead began the final walk of his life on July 3rd during Pickett's charge on the farm of Henry Spangler on Seminary Ridge. He crossed to the left of the Cadore farm. We all know where he was wounded. We don't know his direct path, but after his wound, he did end up at the George Spangler Farm on the right. George was Henry Spangler's half-brother. And as another reminder, we're at the Blue Star today. So Armistead is now at the George Spangler Farm. Armistead arrived at George's farm between 4 and 8 p.m., depending upon the source. He arrived in an ambulance. He was removed on a stretcher and placed on the ground next to the ambulance. 11th Corps Hospital workers Private Emery Sweetland and Private Edson Ames of the 154th New York described Armistead's appearance as pretty bloody and covered with blood. Sweetland heard Armistead as he lay on the stretcher say, "You have a man here that is not afraid to die." The Spanglers' property at that time was a shoulder-to-shoulder mass of chaos, agony, crying, and screaming when Armistead arrived. Many wounded from Pickett's charge were pouring in as overwhelmed surgeons desperately tried to find who could be saved with immediate attention. Even so, the arrival of the Confederate general turned heads, and a large crowd of gawkers formed around his stretcher, actually circling Armistead. The crowd eventually had to be broken up when Dr. Van Arnhem of the 154th New York arrived at Armistead's side and ordered that he be carried away for treatment. Armistead was placed in the summer kitchen, that small building to the right of the Spanglers' house. The Spanglers didn't have a kitchen in their house back then, so they used the summer kitchen for cooking, baking, canning, etc. Spangler patient Justice Silliman of the 17th Connecticut described the 46-year-old Armistead as rather past middle-aged. Private Sweetland said Armistead had gray hair and whiskers. Dr. J. Kling of the 55th Ohio said Armistead was suffering intense pain induced by the wound. Stimulants and painkillers were immediately given him. Dr. Daniel Brinton took time to get to know Armistead, calling him a fine man, intelligent and refined. The Confederate flag that I placed on this slide is where Armistead was placed, just inside the summer kitchen door. And that's also where he died, right there in that spot 2 days later on July 5th. Placed there, right in front of the door, died there. Armistead was placed in the summer kitchen because he was a person of note, deserving of special treatment, even though he was the enemy. Army of the Potomac Captain Fred Stowe, the son of anti-slavery author Harriet Beecher Stowe, of Uncle Tom's Cabin fame, was his roommate in the building and placed there for VIP care. Armistead died July 5th, as I've said. Stowe lived. First Lieutenant Thomas Holland, in the middle. First Lieutenant Thomas Holland of the 28th Virginia wasn't impressed with Armistead's care. Holland was wounded at the face at the end of Pickett's charge and also taken to Spangler, where he monitored Armistead. Complaining later in his journal, Armistead was taken to the 11th Corps Hospital, where he laid across a door that every person had to step over. Being exposed in this way, and an excitable man besides, he was so distressed and so uneasy that he finally died. He often begged that he might be moved from the door, but was not. Armistead was wrapped in a blanket and placed in a coffin made of wood from the Spanglers' farm, buried in their orchard. 1 month later, he was exhumed by an embalmer from Philadelphia, seeking to make money off his body. So Armistead was dug up after a month in a wood coffin. His body was embalmed in whatever condition it was in, and then he was reburied. His body was dug up one more time in October, when relatives paid the embalmer $125, or about $3,000 today, and reburied him in Old St. Paul's Cemetery in downtown Baltimore, and he rests only 4 or 5 blocks from the modern-day Oriole Park at Camden Yards. I have found, confirmed, and listed the names, wound, and treatment of 1,446 Union and Confederate men at the Spangler 11th Corps Hospital, and the names of 138 men who were buried in the Spangler's peach and apple orchards. The Union men were exhumed within a few months after the battle and reburied in Soldiers National Cemetery in Gettysburg. Most Confederates, other than Armistead, lay in Gettysburg until 1872, when they were exhumed and reburied across the South. Armistead is one of 5 Confederates known to have been buried at Spangler. Sergeant Nelson W. Jones on the left, 3rd Maine, 3rd Corps, died at Spangler after being hit in both legs in the peach orchard by an artillery shell. He died even though he made and applied tourniquets on the battlefield. He was 20 or 21 years old. Next to him, Private George Nixon of the 73rd Ohio died at Spangler. He would become the great-grandfather of President Richard M. Nixon. George Nixon was 40 years old when he entered the Army as a poor man working on a rented farm. He left behind a wife and 9 children when he went off to war, very likely only enlisting to make money to support his family. Next to him, Adjutant and First Lieutenant Joseph Heaney, age 21, 157th New York, died of a leg wound at Spangler. Nurse Rebecca Lane Pennypacker Price of the Philadelphia area walked next to his stretcher and held an umbrella over him as he was being carried to the barn for a knee amputation. He died. First Lieutenant Thomas Wheeler, 75th Ohio, age 25, spent almost a month at Spangler before he died of 4 wounds. His parents were at his side, and Nurse Price sang Rock of Ages to him as he died. If you combine the number of wounded at each of these hospitals on the Spangler farm, then you're about almost 3,000 wounded and dying men were treated on Spangler land, more than the entire population of Gettysburg of 2,400 at the time. Okay, I'm a little hesitant about this slide, but I'm going to do it anyway. Powers Hill was named in honor of Solomon Powers, who leased land on the hill and operated a prosperous quarry there. George Spangler owned 3/4 of this hill, and Nathaniel Leitner owned the rest. The problem with Powers Hill, at least the big problem with Powers Hill, is it does not get the attention it deserves for the role it played in the Battle of Gettysburg. I consider Powers Hill to be one of the 4 most important hills in the battle, along with Cemetery Hill, Little Round Top, and the 2 hills that are combined today to be known as Culp's Hill. Without the artillery on Powers Hill, the outcome of the Culp's Hill fight on the morning of day 3 is in doubt. The 14 cannons and 3 batteries on Spangler and Leitner land on top of Powers Hill played a key role in driving the Confederates back on Culp's Hill in a 6-hour fight. Without that infantry and artillery on Powers Hill, the backside of the line, the Baltimore Pike, and the artillery ammunition train on the Spangler's farm are not protected from a Confederate breakthrough. Of the 6 Union stations at the Battle of Gettysburg on July 2nd and 3rd, Powers Hill was the only one that could see every other Army of the Potomac signal station. So it served as a central communications center, transmitted messages from stations not visible to other signal stations, including Army headquarters. And as I mentioned earlier, Henry Slocum used Powers Hill for his right-wing headquarters, and George Meade used it to watch the end of the battle and it says as his headquarters on July 4th. Tremendous progress has been made on this hill since it came under National Park Service control. Junk cars in a house have been removed. Many acres of modern trees on the east side have been taken down and grass has been planted. A marker explaining the fight there is finished and will be placed there. Powers Hill is safe and preserved, and the National Park Service has done wonderful work there, just like it's done all over this beautiful battlefield. They deserve credit, and they are the experts. But with hesitation and the full understanding that the Park Service knows way more than I do, I would like to offer a couple of suggestions. Take them for what they're worth. Number 1, unlike the other 3 most important Gettysburg hills, you will not find Powers Hill on the battlefield's official map that visitors receive. So you have to find it on your own and learn about it on your own. I'd love to see Powers Hill on the battlefield map. Number 2, unlike those other 3 hills that I mentioned, access to Powers Hill is not good. There are no signs leading, there's one dirt path going up that hill. There are no signs leading. So if you're visiting it for the first time, you got to walk around the bottom of the hill before you find the lane to take up. So I'd like to see a sign there. And once you make it up to the top, or close to the top, there are 2 rock walls. See my friend Jim? He's making it over the second one. So if you have any physical disabilities at all, you're not going to be able to go up to the top of Powers Hill to look at the monuments and the markers. Finally, last one, only 3. If you keep going past the top of that hill and get right to where that mark is, right there, you find this, as I've shown in the 2 pictures. You find a garbage dump. and that's been there for decades. A whole field of barrels, wire, and other trash. An entire field of disrespect that's been on this hill, like I said, for decades. My hope is that this trash dump can be cleaned up someday. We're almost there in giving Powers Hill the treatment it deserves for its critical role in the Battle of Gettysburg. We've come so far, just have a little bit ways to go. The 11th Corps wounded continued to be sent away until the Spanglers got their farm back on August 7th, at least what was left of it. They filed 3 damage claims to the federal and state governments totaling about $5,000, and they were awarded $90. And it's believed that they didn't get any of that. It's believed that that went to their Washington, D.C. attorney. The U.S. Quartermaster's agent said the government of the United States is no more responsible for bringing on the battle fought there than it would have been had a tornado passed over the country, causing its widespread destruction, as did that terrible engagement. That battle and hospital damage was his misfortune. Okay, George and Elizabeth Spangler. That is them. I had no idea after I started on the first book in 2016 what they looked like, so I did not have their picture. And after 6 years of study, we had a Descendants Day, excuse me. And their 2 times great grandson, Maurice Spangler, from Kansas and now South Carolina, walked up to me and handed me that picture, and he said, "Ron, is this what you're looking for?" And that was when the biggest hug of the day took place. So that's George and Elizabeth Spangler. They will be in the second book now. Daniel and Effie Spangler up on the right, that's their son Daniel, who moved away to Kansas not long after the Battle of Gettysburg. This photo is of Daniel in Kansas on his wedding day with Effie. And Maurice's brother Calvin, 2 times great-grandson of George and Elizabeth Spangler, provided me with that photo. Thank you so, so much. Also in the second book. The big picture at the top was taken in 1888, probably for the 25th anniversary of the battle. That's Benaiah Spangler, Daniel's brother. He was living on the farm and running the farm because Mom and Dad bought a small farm next door and moved there. So that's Benaiah with his wife Sarah and their only child, Mary Elizabeth. So, show you what they had. Their house at the time of the battle, that big. So in 1864, they added all that. So you can see 6 of them crammed up in there with all of the medical staff and the wounded. That was a pretty tight house. You can see their smokehouse where they smoked and preserved their meats, their outhouse, the summer kitchen where Armistead died and the grape arbor on it, where they baked their bread in that oven and the other buildings in the barn. So they were in pretty good shape by then. George said he was surprised by how quickly they got things back together. The bottom photo is from 1886 or 1887, is in front of Granite Schoolhouse, which was in the middle of the Spangler land. That includes 4 members of George's family. This is where Mary Elizabeth attended school on her grandfather's farm. Mary Elizabeth is under the star. Benaiah is at the far left underneath the X. He was on the township school board. Clara Patterson, daughter of Sabina, is under the arrow, as is Alice, another daughter of Sabina, under the oval. And we have some granddaughters here. So this is George and Elizabeth Spangler's granddaughter, Alice. We have some of her granddaughters here today, right? They're here. It's that tough German stock. Also in this picture, you might notice, Teacher Maggie Schwartz. She's holding a very big strong-looking ruler. Can't imagine what that's for. And this is Raphael Sherfy of the Sherfy family with his dog. Sadly, Raphael's dad had already died, but he went on to become a prominent dentist in Gettysburg anyway. George Spangler was chairman of the Cumberland Township School Board when he donated the land for Granite Schoolhouse in 1861. He also was a church and Adams County leader, serving on several boards, including the Evergreen Cemetery Board that voted not to allow Confederate burials. A teacher whom George hired said, "Mr. Spangler proved himself to be a very efficient school official and made a lasting impression on my mind as a man of truthfulness and honesty in all things." And I'm going to skip ahead in the interest of time. I did not know when I finished the first book any single descendant of George and Elizabeth Spangler. But there they are. I know them now, including the ones that are here. So I did genealogy research and contacted some, and they spread out the word that they're descended from the George Spangler farm. Every single every single person in this photo is descended straight line from George and Elizabeth Spangler. From Harriet, Sabina, or Daniel. Benaiah doesn't have descendants today. This has turned out to be one of the favorite parts of my book, is finding the descendants and having meetings with them and getting together with them and being friends with them. So if you don't mind this time, would you stand up and be recognized? And back there, Calvin, Duncan. All right, all these people up here are Sabina, right? All Sabina. Daniel from Kansas, right there, and Harriet, the oldest daughter, right back there. Thank you, folks. And we're all going to go get together at the farm after this and just have a nice little get together. These are pictures from our biggest Descendants Day so far of June 2022. The top picture is Sabina's descendants. These two lovely ladies did not know each other before this day. They're second cousins, and now you can see they're arm in arm. One of these gentlemen, one of these gentlemen has donated probably over $100,000 to the farm and the foundation since he found out his tie to it. This beautiful young lady is Hannah Ketterman through Sabina. She's a fourth great grandchild of George and Elizabeth. She was also my realtor in Pittsburgh, and she sold me a house in Pittsburgh. We had 5 times great grandchildren and 2 times great grandchildren. We had 7 months old to 90 years old, and they came from 9 states: California, Kansas, Illinois, Kentucky, South Carolina, Pennsylvania, New York, Vermont. And right here in Adams County, there was some of these folks lived right on the battlefield when they were growing up, like right across from Tommy's Pizza. But Grandma Alice never told them that they were descended from the farm. Next to last thing, I also did genealogy work on some of the soldiers who died at the 11th Corps Hospital. And I found one celebrity of note who is descended from a guy who died at the George Spangler Farm. So that celebrity of note who is connected to the farm is Woody Harrelson, TV and movie star Woody Harrelson. So Woody, let's see, he's the 4 times great grandson of Private Isaac Sperry of the 73rd Ohio, who was shot in the chest near the intersection of the Emmitsburg and Townytown roads on July 2nd, taken to Spangler and died there on July 5th. The former merchant and 37-year-old Sperry was one of the oldest soldiers to die, and he leads to Harrelson through his 12-year-old daughter who was 12 when her father died. He's buried, Sperry is buried in Soldiers National Cemetery with both his first and last names misspelled. I tried to get through the many layers to Woody Harrelson and all the walls they have and the blocks and the representative. I know I didn't come close. I didn't know if he cared. I didn't know if he'd want to know. I tried. I did find out, Wayne, if you're interested, for $100,000, he'll come and speak in Gettysburg. So keep that in mind. This is my last slide. That's what the barn looked like when the Gettysburg Foundation purchased this place for $1.85 million in 2008. They raised $3 million more, and now look at this masterpiece that the Gettysburg Foundation has created. There was 3 feet of manure from one end of the stable to the other. And it's gross, but it was rotting the beams, and the barn could fall down at any moment. When they redid it, now 90% of the wood on the bottom floor is original. It was there when the hospital was there. 50% of the floor on the top floor was there when the hospital was there. You can visit this farm. The foundation encourages it. It's open Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays in June, July, and early August. But you have to take a bus. Unless you're a Spangler descendant, they get to drive out. And we check to make sure that they're actually Spangler descendants. We don't want any phonies, but everybody else has to drive out. Wayne, everyone at the foundation, Carol, thank you so much for having me here today, but more importantly, thank you for preserving the rich history of the George Spangler Farm. Thank you for saving that farm and its stories, and thank you for saving it and allowing me to be the one little person to do these 2 books on that farm. I'll always be grateful. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Ron.
Thank you,
Again,
everybody.
I think we got a special gift today. Now Ron's going to go out into the lobby of the Visitor Center. His books are available out there for you to purchase, and he will be very, very glad to sign them for you. We were able to bring programs to you like this because the Gettysburg Foundation very much is dedicated to promoting education and preservation. If you are not a member, Wayne always says we're going into commercials now, but if you're not a member, and you should be, please visit our Friends Desk out there and join us in advancing the cause that we love so much. Enjoy a break, get some lunch. We will return here at 1:30 for our next presentation of the Sacred Trust program. Thank you.